July 4th, 1945, Camp Swift, Texas.
Wounds received in action.
The sun had
Thank you,
barely
sir.
cracked
Thank
the
you, sir.
horizon, but already
Carry
the
on.
heat pressed down like a hand.
Here
Hauptmann
you
Karl
go.
Friedrich stood
Thanks,
in a
man.
line with 200 other German prisoners, his throat dry, his stomach knotted. Before him stretched 6 metal grills, each one 30 feet long. Smoke rose in lazy spirals. The smell hit him first, charcoal, wood smoke, and underneath, cutting through everything else, the scent of meat, real meat, cooking meat, the kind of smell Karl hadn't experienced in 4 years of war. His hands began to shake. An American sergeant stood behind the first grill, tongs in hand, flipping strips of something dark and glistening. The sergeant looked up, caught Karl's eye, and smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile, just a smile. Karl looked away, his heart hammered. This had to be a trick, a show, some kind of humiliation they were planning. The Americans had won the war. They could do anything they wanted to their prisoners. Why would they be cooking breakfast? The line moved forward. Karl shuffled with that boot, scuffing the hard Texas dirt. Beside him, a younger officer named Hans Weber whispered in German, "Do you see how much food there is?" Karl said nothing. He had learned in the last 3 months as a prisoner that silence was safer than hope. But Hans kept talking. Hans always kept talking. There must be 1,000 strips of bacon, maybe 2,000. And look, eggs, real eggs, Karl, not powdered, not ersatz, real. Karl glanced at the tables. Hans was right. Mountains of food. More food than Karl had seen in one place since 1941. Before Russia, before everything went wrong. A metal tray appeared in Karl's hands. He didn't remember taking it from the stack. His body moved automatically now, following the man in front of him, shuffling forward in the line of prisoners. The American sergeant with the tongs looked at Karl. The sergeant was young, maybe 25, with sunburned skin and kind eyes. The sergeant used the tongs to lift 4 strips of bacon from the grill. 4. He laid them carefully on Karl's tray one at a time. Each strip was dark at the edges, still bubbling with fat, glistening with grease and salt. Steam rose from them. Karl stared, his mouth flooded with saliva so fast he almost choked. The sergeant said something in English. Karl had learned a few words by now, but his mind had gone blank. All he could process was the bacon, the smell, the impossible, devastating smell of pork fat and salt and smoke. Next station, a different soldier scooped scrambled eggs onto the tray. Real eggs, yellow, fluffy, steaming. Not the gray powder mixed with water that the Wehrmacht had called eggs in the last year of the war. Next station, fried potatoes, golden and crispy. Next station, 2 pieces of white bread. Toast, the Americans called it, and on top of the bread, a pat of butter. Actual butter. Karl's vision blurred. He blinked hard. Not here, not in front of everyone, not in front of the Americans. Last station, coffee. The soldier poured black liquid from a massive pot into a tin cup. The smell of it was dark and rich and real. Karl stood there holding his tray with both hands. The weight of it felt impossible. This much food. For him. For a prisoner. For a defeated enemy. Someone behind him said something impatient in German. Karl moved. He walked to the long wooden tables set up in the shade of a large tent. American soldiers sat at some tables. German prisoners at others. All of them eating. All of them with the same food. Karl found a spot at the end of a table and sat down. Hans sat across from him, already eating, eyes wide with something like religious ecstasy. Down the table, Karl could see Otto Richter, the SS Oberleutnant, who had been in their barracks since May. Otto sat with his arms crossed, his tray untouched in front of him. Karl looking down at his own tray. At the bacon. 4 strips, each one about 6 inches long. The edges were crispy and dark, almost black in places. The middle sections were softer, layered with fat that had rendered down to pure flavor. He could see individual grains of salt on the surface crystallized in white. He picked up one strip with his fingers. It was still hot, almost too hot. The grease coated his fingertips immediately. He lifted it to his mouth. The first bite released a crunch that seemed impossibly loud. His teeth broke through the crispy edge, then the softer middle. Juice exploded across his tongue. Salt, fat, smoke, pork. Karl closed his eyes. The taste was so intense it hurt. Not physically, emotionally. It hurt because it was perfect, because it reminded him of Sunday mornings before the war when his father would fry bacon in their kitchen in Stuttgart, when Germany was at peace, when Carl was 17 and believed the world made sense. He chewed slowly, swallowed, opened his eyes. The bacon was already gone. He didn't remember eating it. His fingers were greasy, his mouth was full of flavor, and something wet was running down his cheek. Hans stared at him from across the table. "Carl, you're crying." Carl wiped his face quickly with the back of his hand. He looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. The Americans at the next table were laughing about something, not paying attention. The other German prisoners were too focused on their own food, but Hans had seen. Carl cleared his throat, picked up the second strip of bacon, forced himself to eat it slowly this time, to actually taste it instead of inhaling it. "When did you last eat bacon?" Hans asked quietly. Carl thought about it. 1941, maybe 42, before Russia. "My last time was 1943, my mother's birthday. She saved rations for 2 months to buy enough for the family." "Is she alive?" "I don't know." And they ate in silence after that. Carl worked through the bacon, then the eggs. The eggs were creamy and rich, probably cooked with milk or cream, things that hadn't existed in Germany for years. The potatoes were crispy on the outside, soft inside, seasoned with salt and pepper. The toast was soft enough that his finger left an impression when he touched it. The butter melted immediately when he spread it. When Carl lifted the coffee cup to his lips, he half expected it to taste like the chicory and acorn mixture they'd called coffee in the Wehrmacht. Instead, it tasted like actual coffee, bitter and strong and real. He drank it in 3 long swallows, barely noticing that it burned his throat. When his tray was empty, Carl sat back and stared at it. His stomach felt full for the first time in years. Truly full. Not the hollow temporary fullness of thin soup and hard bread, but satisfied, complete. He looked around the field. Hundreds of men eating, Germans and Americans, prisoners and guards, all of them with the same food on the same metal trays. An American soldier at the next table caught Carl looking. The soldier was older, maybe 30, with sergeant stripes on his sleeve. He had a hard face weathered by sun and war, but when their eyes met, the sergeant nodded once, just a slight dip of his chin. Acknowledgement, human to human. Carl nodded back before he could stop himself. The sergeant looked away back to his own breakfast, but something had passed between them. Some tiny crack in the wall that separated conqueror from conquered. Hans leaned forward. "Carl, do you understand what just happened? We ate breakfast." "No, we ate their breakfast. The same food they eat. Not prisoner food, not punishment or rations. The same." Carl said nothing, because Hans was right. And that was the problem. That was what made no sense at all. Everything Carl had been taught about America, everything the Nazi Party had told him for 12 years, said this shouldn't be possible. Americans were supposed to be barbaric, weak, controlled by Jews and plutocrats who cared nothing for common people. Germany had been defending Western civilization from this corrupt, dying democracy. But Carl's stomach was full of bacon and eggs and real coffee. His fingers still smelled of pork fat. And across the field, American soldiers were laughing and talking and treating their prisoners like human beings. One of these things was true. The other was a lie. Carl wasn't ready yet to admit which was which. But 3 months ago, when he'd surrendered in a muddy field in France, he'd expected to be shot, or starved, or worked to death in some mine. Instead, the Americans had given him chocolate on the first day, fed him beef stew on the second, put him on a ship with actual bunks, brought him to Texas and given him a bed with a mattress. And now this, bacon, on their national holiday. The 4th of July, they called it, Independence Day. Carl looked at the American flags hanging from poles around the field. Red and white stripes, blue corner with white stars, 50 stars Hans had counted earlier. One for each state. What kind of nation does this? Carl whispered more to himself than to Hans. But Hans heard anyway. A strong one, Hans said. A nation that doesn't need to be cruel to prove it won. Down the table, Otto Richter stood up abruptly. His tray was still full, the food untouched. He walked away without eating any of it, back toward the prisoner barracks. Several other men watched him go. Some looked ashamed. Others looked defiant. Carl understood. Otto was holding on to the old certainties, the old story about who the enemy was and what they deserved. Accepting American kindness meant accepting that the story might have been wrong. And if the story was wrong about this, what else had it been wrong about? Carl wasn't ready to follow that thought to its conclusion. Not yet. But he picked up the last piece of toast, the one he'd been saving, and bit into it. The butter had melted completely now, soaking into the bread. It tasted like sunshine and childhood and everything he'd lost. Someone started playing music. Carl looked up. An American military band had assembled on a small stage at the far end of the field. They played something bright and brassy and triumphant. Not Wagner, not anything Carl recognized. Something wholly American. Some of the soldiers started singing along. Carl didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Pride, joy, celebration. The Germans sat quietly listening. Some looked angry, some looked confused. A few, like Hans, looked curious. Carl just listened. And for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't thinking about tactics or survival or the next battle. He was just a man sitting in the Texas sun, listening to music with a full stomach and grease on his fingers. It was the strangest morning of his life, and it had started with bacon. But to understand how Carl ended up sitting in Texas on the 4th of July, eating bacon and questioning everything he'd ever believed, we need to go back. Back to the surrender, back to the ship, back to the moment when one American sergeant decided that enemies could be something other than animals. 3 months earlier, May 3rd, 1945. The war in Europe was over, but Karl Friedrich didn't know that yet. He only knew that his Panzer battalion was surrounded. Fuel gone, ammunition gone, half the men dead or missing, the other half starving in what was left of their vehicles. They were hiding in a forest near the Ruhr industrial area, what the Americans would later call the Ruhr Pocket. More than 300,000 German soldiers trapped in an area that shrank smaller every day. Carl stood next to his tank, or what used to be his tank. The engine was dead. The treads were broken. The main gun had no shells. It was just a 30-ton piece of metal, now useless as a monument. Around him, his crew sat on the ground. 5 men who'd served with him since Normandy. Boys, really. The oldest was 24. They looked at Carl with hollow eyes, waiting for orders that Carl couldn't give. Lieutenant Hans Weber approached from the trees. Hans was the youngest officer in the battalion, fresh-faced and idealistic even now, even after everything. Hauptmann, the colonel is dead. Carl had expected this. They'd lost radio contact with battalion headquarters 2 days ago. Who's in command? Oberleutnant Richter. Carl closed his eyes. Otto Richter, SS. A true believer. The kind of officer who'd shoot his own men for talking about surrender. What does Richter say? He says we fight to the last man. No surrender. No retreat. With what? We have no fuel, no ammunition, no food. Hans looked at the ground. He says it doesn't matter. We die as German soldiers or we die as traitors. Those are the only choices. Carl turned and looked at his crew, at these boys who'd followed him through France and Belgium and now Germany, who trusted him to keep them alive, who were starving and exhausted and waiting to die because some SS fanatic couldn't accept that the war was lost. Carl made his decision. Tell Richter I'm taking my crew to find food. If he wants to stay here and die, that's his choice. Hans stared. Carl, he'll call you a deserter. The war is over, Hans. In a week, maybe less, everyone surrenders. I'm not sacrificing these boys for Otto's pride. I'm coming with you. Hans, no, you have a career to think about. After the war. What career? What war, Carl? It's over. We lost. I'd rather live as a prisoner than die for nothing in these woods. So Carl took his crew and Hans and 3 other soldiers who heard what they were doing. 13 men total. They walked out of the forest at dawn on May 3rd with their hands raised in white undershirts tied to sticks. American soldiers found them within an hour. Young GIs, nervous fingers on triggers. Carl spoke first in his broken English. We surrender. No weapons. We are finished. The American sergeant in charge was a hard-looking man in his late 20s. He had cold eyes and a scar across his left cheek. His name tape said Morrison. Sergeant Morrison walked up to Carl and stared at him for a long moment. Carl waited to be shot or beaten. The Americans had every right. Karl's tanks had killed Americans at Normandy, at the Bulge at Remagen. Maybe Morrison had lost friends to German armor. Maybe he wanted revenge. Instead, Morrison pulled something from his jacket pocket, a Hershey's chocolate bar. He broke it in half and handed one piece to Karl. Karl stared at it. Actual chocolate, American chocolate. He'd heard about these. The Wehrmacht had warned that American chocolate might be poisoned. But Karl was starving. And somehow looking into Morrison's eyes, he knew it wasn't poison. He took the chocolate, bit into it. The sweetness exploded in his mouth. Real sugar, real cocoa. He'd forgotten what chocolate tasted like. Behind Karl, Otto Richter appeared from the trees. Otto had followed them after all, unable to die alone in the forest. Otto saw Karl eating the chocolate and slapped it out of his hand. Poison, Otto shouted in German. They're poisoning you. Morrison picked up the fallen chocolate, dusted it off, and ate it himself. Then he pulled out another bar and offered it to Otto. Otto knocked it away. Morrison shrugged and pocketed it. Your friend doesn't trust easy, Morrison said in English. Karl didn't know what all the words meant, but he understood the tone. Not mocking, just observing. They were searched, not roughly, efficiently. The Americans took their wallets, their watches, their wedding rings, put them all in bags with numbers, told them through a translator that they'd get everything back eventually. Then they were marched to a temporary POW cage, just a field surrounded by wire with American guards and machine guns on all sides. 500 German soldiers already inside, more arriving every hour. Karl expected to be left there to rot. Instead, within 2 hours, a field kitchen appeared. American soldiers in white aprons set up a serving line. The smell hit the cage before the food arrived. Beef stew, real beef. Karl watched Hans nearly faint from hunger and anticipation. The gates opened, the prisoners lined up docile as children. Each man got a metal bowl and a spoon. Each man got 2 ladles of thick stew, a chunk of bread, and a cup of water. Karl found a spot to sit and stared at his bowl. Chunks of beef, actual beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, a layer of fat on top that caught the light. He ate slowly at first, then faster. Then he was scraping the bottom of the bowl with the edge of his bread, getting every last drop. When he looked up, he saw Otto Richter sitting alone, his bowl untouched beside him. Hans sat down next to Karl. He hasn't eaten anything since yesterday, Hans said, nodding toward Otto. His choice. He says it's poison, or it's a trick, that they're feeding us now so we'll work better later when they send us to the mines. Maybe he's right. Do you believe that? Karl looked at his empty bowl, at the bread in his hand, at the American guards standing casually by the wire smoking cigarettes and talking among themselves. I don't know what I believe anymore. That night, Karl lay on the bare ground and stared at the stars. His stomach was full, not satisfied, but fuller than it had been in months. And tomorrow they'd told him there would be more food. Breakfast, oatmeal and bread. It made no sense. Victors didn't feed the defeated this well. Not in any war Karl had studied, not in any war he'd fought. 2 days later, they were loaded onto trucks, driven to a port, put on a ship. The ship was a nightmare. 2,000 prisoners packed into cargo holds, metal bunks 3 high, the smell of oil and rust and unwashed bodies. The Atlantic Ocean in May, cold and violent. Karl got seasick the first day. So did half the prisoners. They lay in their bunks clutching buckets, groaning. The ship rolled and pitched. Some men prayed. Some men cursed. Otto Richter in the bunk above Karl did neither. He just stared at the ceiling with hollow eyes. But even on the ship, the Americans fed them. 3 times a day, oatmeal for breakfast, soup and bread for lunch, stew for dinner. Not generous portions, but regular, predictable. No one starved. Hans got so sick he couldn't eat for 3 days. He just lay in his bunk, pale and sweating, dry heaving into a bucket. Karl watched an American medic climb down into the hold to check on the sick prisoners. The medic was young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles. He moved from bunk to bunk with a flashlight and a medical kit. When he got to Hans, he checked his pulse, his temperature. Then he pulled out a small bottle and poured something into Hans's water cup. Electrolytes, the medic said in terrible German. Drink, you need. Hans drank, made a face, but he kept it down. The medic moved on to the next sick prisoner. Karl watched him work. Watched him treat enemy soldiers with the same care he'd give his own men. Watched him use medicine and supplies on people who 6 months ago had been trying to kill Americans. Otto saw it too. From the bunk above, Otto spoke in German. Why do they do this? Karl didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. But Hans, still pale and sick, whispered back, Geneva Convention. What? Otto said. Geneva Convention. Rules for war. Rules for prisoners. They have to follow the rules. Rules, Otto spat. The Fuhrer said the Geneva Convention was weakness, Western decadence. Maybe, Hans said, but they're following it, and we're alive because of it. Otto was silent after that. The crossing took 12 days. 12 days of seasickness and cramped bunks and the constant throb of engines. But 12 days of regular food. 12 days of being treated like human beings instead of animals. On day 13, they heard land had been spotted. On day 14, the ship slowed and entered a harbor. Karl pressed against a porthole with 50 other men trying to see outside. What he saw made no sense. A city, a whole city, intact, no bomb damage, no ruins, buildings standing straight and tall, cranes working, cars driving, lights on. Hans stared. Where are we? America, someone said. Newport News, Virginia. America, the enemy homeland, the place Karl had been taught to fear and hate for 12 years. It looked like paradise. They were marched off the ship in groups of 100. Karl's legs shook after 2 weeks at sea. The solid ground felt strange under his feet, but he barely noticed. He was too busy staring at everything around him. The harbor was vast and busy, cargo ships being loaded and unloaded, workers everywhere moving with purpose, and women. Women working right alongside the men, operating forklifts, directing traffic, wearing pants and work boots and looking completely comfortable. Karl had never seen anything like it. In Germany, women worked in factories, yes, but only because all the men were at war. And they certainly didn't look this confident, this free. They were loaded onto trains, not cattle cars, passenger cars, with seats and windows. Karl sat by a window as the train pulled away from the Virginia port. The seat beneath him had actual padding. Not much, but enough. More comfort than he'd experienced in 3 years of war. Hans pressed his face against the window on the other side. Other prisoners crowded around, all trying to see America. What they saw confused them. The train rolled through Virginia countryside, past farms with full barns, past towns where shops had glass in their windows and lights burning inside, past gas stations where cars lined up for fuel like it was nothing unusual. No bomb craters, no rubble, no burned-out buildings, no refugees walking along the roads with everything they owned on their backs. One prisoner, a former corporal from Hamburg, started laughing, a harsh, bitter sound. Look at it, he said. Just look. While our cities burned, while our children starved, they had this, all of this, and we thought we were winning. No one answered him, because he was right. The train journey took 3 days. 3 days of rolling through American states Karl had only heard about in propaganda films. Tennessee with its green hills, Arkansas with its endless forests, and finally Texas. Texas was different, flatter, hotter, drier. The landscape turned brown and dusty, but even here, even in what looked like desert, Karl saw prosperity. Cattle grazing, oil derricks pumping, towns with paved roads and electric lines. The prisoners were given food on the train, sandwiches, apples, water. Nothing fancy but regular. Every few hours, American MPS walked through the cars with food carts. No one went hungry. Otto Richter finally ate on the second day. Karl watched him take a sandwich when he thought no one was looking. Watched him devour it in 4 bites, then stare at his hands like they'd betrayed him. The train slowed on the afternoon of the third day. Through the windows, Karl saw guard towers, barbed wire, wooden barracks stretching across dusty ground. Camp Swift, Texas. The prisoners filed off the train in the baking heat. Karl had never felt heat like this, dry and crushing. The sun like a physical weight on his shoulders. Within minutes, his uniform was soaked with sweat. American guards formed them into lines, counted them, checked names against lists. All of it professional and impersonal. No shouting, no violence, just bureaucracy. Then Sergeant Morrison appeared. Carl recognized him immediately. The same hard face, the same scar on his cheek, the sergeant who'd given him chocolate 3 weeks ago in France. Morrison walked down the line of prisoners studying faces. When he reached Carl, he stopped. "You, tank officer. I remember you." Carl understood enough English now to catch the meaning. He nodded. "You ate the chocolate," Morrison said. "Yes." "Your friend didn't." Morrison nodded toward Otto, who stood rigid in line, staring straight ahead. "He is difficult man," Carl said in careful English. Morrison almost smiled. "Almost. Yeah, I got a few of those in my unit too." Then Morrison moved on, continuing down the line. But something had happened in that brief exchange. Recognition. Two soldiers acknowledging each other across the divide of war. The prisoners were marched to a section of camp surrounded by a double row of barbed wire, guard towers at each corner, floodlights on tall poles. This was the prisoner compound, their new home. But when the gates opened and they walked inside, Carl stopped short. Wooden barracks, real buildings, not tents. Each one had screens on the windows to keep out insects. Each one had a door that closed. Inside, Carl found rows of metal bunks, 2 tiers. Each bunk had a thin mattress. Not much, but more than the bare wood or concrete he'd slept on for the last year of the war. At the end of the barracks stood a metal stove for winter heating, hooks on the walls for hanging clothes, a floor that had been swept clean. Hans chose the bunk above Carl's. He pressed down on the mattress with both hands, testing it. "Hauptmann, this is better than what I had in the Wehrmacht." He was right. In the last year, German soldiers had slept wherever they could, in ruins, in foxholes, in frozen fields. A wooden building with a mattress was luxury. Otto found a bunk in the corner and sat on it without speaking. His face was stone. His eyes were somewhere else. An American corporal entered the barracks with a German-speaking translator. The corporal was young, maybe 23, with a Texas drawl so thick the translator had trouble keeping up. "Gentlemen," the translator said in German, "welcome to Camp Swift. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. That means you will be fed 3 meals a day. You will have access to medical care. You will be given work assignments, but nothing that violates the convention. No forced labor related to war production." The corporal continued through the translator. "You will answer roll call twice daily. You will stay inside the compound unless given permission to leave. You will follow orders from American personnel. Disobedience will result in loss of privileges. Serious disobedience will result in solitary confinement. We clear?" The prisoners nodded. "Good. Dinner is at 1800 hours. That's 6 p.m. for those who need translation." "Welcome to Texas." After they left, the barracks erupted in whispered conversations. German voices overlapping, processing, questioning. "Did you see the buildings?" They said 3 meals a day. "My cousin was a prisoner in Russia. He said they got bread and water, sometimes just water. This has to be temporary, a show for the Red Cross or something." Otto's voice cut through the chatter. "It's a trap. They're making us comfortable, so we'll cooperate. So we'll work for them. So we'll forget we're Germans." "We are prisoners, Otto," Hans said quietly. "Not Germans anymore. Just prisoners. Speak for yourself." That first dinner proved Otto right and wrong at the same time. The prisoners lined up outside a long wooden building. The smell from inside made Carl's stomach clench with hunger. Real cooking, not field rations, not ersatz, anything. Real food. Inside, American cooks in white aprons stood behind metal serving stations. The prisoners filed past with metal trays, the same trays the American soldiers used. First station, beef stew, a full ladle, chunks of beef visible in brown gravy. Second station, mashed potatoes, white and steaming. Third station, green beans from a can, plain but real. Fourth station, 2 slices of white bread and a pat of margarine. Last station, coffee, black and strong. Carl found a table and sat down. Around him, 200 German prisoners ate in near silence. The only sounds were spoons on metal, chewing, swallowing. Carl tasted the beef stew, closed his eyes, opened them. More meat in this one meal than his family in Germany had eaten in a month. He knew this because his mother's last letter received in March had described their rations. 100 grams of meat per week per person, if they were lucky. Here in this prison camp in Texas, Carl was eating better than free German civilians. The thought made him put down his spoon for a moment, made him look around at the other prisoners. Some ate frantically, shoveling food into their mouths like animals. Others ate slowly, savoring every bite. A few, like Otto, ate mechanically, faces blank, refusing to show pleasure or gratitude. Carl picked up his spoon again and finished his meal, because refusing to eat wouldn't change anything, wouldn't bring back the dead, wouldn't undo the lost war, wouldn't make Germany whole again. It would just leave him hungry. That night, lying on his mattress in the dark, listening to 200 men breathe and shift and snore, Carl thought about his children. Peter was 8 now, or maybe 9. Carl had lost track of time. Elise was 6. They were living with their grandmother in Hamburg, or what was left of Hamburg. The last letter Carl had received back in April said the children were alive, hungry but alive. Carl pulled that letter from his boot. He'd read it so many times the paper was soft as cloth. 3 sentences in his wife Greta's handwriting. Greta is dead. Bombing. The children are with my mother. His wife had written about her own death in third person, as if she knew she wouldn't survive to send it, as if she was writing from beyond whatever moment killed her. Carl folded the letter carefully and put it back in his boot. Tomorrow he would ask about sending mail home, about telling his children he was alive, about somehow getting them food or help or hope. Tonight he just lay in the dark and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of an American prison camp, the hum of generators, the distant call of a night bird he didn't recognize, footsteps of guards walking their patrols, safe sounds, ordinary sounds. It had been so long since Carl had felt safe that he'd almost forgotten what it meant. The days fell into rhythm after that. Wake at 5:30 to a bugle call, roll call at 6. The Americans counted them twice a day every day, marked names on clipboards, checked faces against photographs. All very thorough, all very American. Breakfast at 6, oatmeal most mornings, sometimes with raisins, sometimes with brown sugar, always with bread and margarine, always with coffee. Work assignments at 7. Carl was assigned to the kitchen, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, cleaning floors. The irony wasn't lost on him. A Panzer captain reduced to kitchen duty, but the work was easy, mindless, and it kept him near the food. The kitchen staff was a mix of American cooks and prisoner workers. The Americans mostly left the Germans alone as long as the work got done. No friendship, but no cruelty either. Just coexistence. Carl learned quickly that American kitchens produced waste on a scale he couldn't comprehend. Potato peels by the bucket, leftover bread by the loaf, meat scraps and vegetable ends and coffee grounds. All of it thrown away. One morning, Carl watched a cook scrape an entire tray of scrambled eggs into the garbage. The eggs were slightly overcooked. That was all. Too dry. So they were thrown away. Carl thought about his children eating turnip soup, about German civilians fighting over scraps in bombed-out markets, about women trading family heirlooms for a few kilos of flour. And here the Americans threw away perfectly good food because it wasn't quite right. The cook noticed Carl staring. What? The cook said in English. Carl shook his head. He didn't have the English words to explain, didn't have any words that would make sense. The cook shrugged and moved on. Hans worked in the laundry. He spent his days washing and ironing American uniforms. He told Carl it was like meditation. The rhythm of it, the steam, the smell of soap. Otto refused to work for the first week. He sat in the barracks during work hours alone, staring at nothing. The Americans put him in solitary confinement for 3 days. When he came out, he reported to the work detail without comment. They assigned him to the camp garden, digging in the hard Texas soil, trying to grow vegetables that weren't meant for this climate. The 3 of them ate dinner together most nights, rarely speaking, just sitting in shared silence while German voices murmured around them. On Carl's 10th day at Camp Swift, Sergeant Morrison appeared in the kitchen. Carl was elbow-deep in dishwater, scrubbing a large pot. Morrison walked past the other workers and stopped at Carl's station. "You, Friedrich, right?" Carl looked up, soapy water dripping from his hands. "Yes, Sergeant. You speak English." "Little bit. I am learning." "Good. Come with me." Carl dried his hands and followed Morrison out of the kitchen. The sergeant led him across the compound toward a smaller building Carl hadn't entered before. An office of some kind. Inside, the air was cooler. A fan rotated slowly on the ceiling. Behind a desk sat an American colonel, older, maybe 50, with gray at his temples and tired eyes. Hauptmann Friedrich, the colonel said. I'm Colonel Patterson, camp commander. Have a seat. Carl sat in the wooden chair across from the desk. Morrison stood by the door. Patterson opened a file folder. Says here you commanded a panzer unit, 5th Panzer Division. Fought at Normandy. The Bulge. Remagen. Carl said nothing. This could be interrogation, or worse. Patterson looked up. Relax, Captain. War's over. I don't care about tactical information. I care about this. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Carl recognized his own handwriting. A request form he'd filled out 3 days ago. Permission to send a letter to his children. Your wife died in Hamburg, Patterson said. I'm sorry. Thank you. Your children are with their grandmother. You want to send them a letter? Yes, sir. Patterson nodded slowly. Here's the problem, Captain. We can't allow direct mail from prisoners to Germany yet. Security concerns. But we work with the Red Cross. They can get messages through. It'll take a few weeks, but your children will know you're alive. Carl felt something in his chest loosen. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. Thank you, Colonel. There's more. You can write them. Tell them you're safe. Tell them you're being treated well. But you can't send packages. Can't send money. Can't send food. Not yet. Maybe in a few months when things settle down. But not now, understand? Carl nodded. It was more than he'd expected. More than he'd hoped for. Patterson closed the folder. One more thing, we're starting an education program. English lessons. American history. Civics. It's voluntary. But I think you should consider it. Why me? Because you're smart enough to know the war is over. Smart enough to think about what comes next. Germany's going to need people like you when you go home. People who understand how democracy works. I was Nazi colonel. I fought for Hitler. I know. And you lost. The question is what you learned from that. Patterson stood signaling the meeting was over. Think about it, Captain. Classes start next month. Morrison escorted Carl back to the kitchen. At the door, the sergeant paused. You got kids? Morrison asked. Yes, 2. How old? Boy is 8, girl is 6. Morrison looked away for a moment. When he looked back, something had changed in his face. Some wall had lowered. I had a brother, Danny. He was 19. Died at the Bulge. German tank got him. Carl went very still. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Yeah, me too. They stood there in awkward silence. Finally, Morrison said, It wasn't your tank. I checked. Your unit was somewhere else by then, but it was a tank like yours, a Panzer. Some German captain, just like you, probably thinking he was doing the right thing. War is a terrible thing, Carl said. Yeah. Morrison turned to leave, then stopped. Your kids, what are their names? Peter and Elise. Peter and Elise, Morrison repeated. When you write to them, tell them you're okay. Tell them their dad's coming home. Kids need to hear that. Then he walked away, boot heels loud on the wooden floor. Carl stood outside the kitchen for a long moment. Processing. Understanding. Morrison had lost a brother to German tanks. Had every reason to hate Carl, to want revenge, to make Carl's life hell. Instead, he'd checked to see if it was Carl's specific tank. And when it wasn't, he'd found some way to separate the man from the uniform, the father from the enemy. Carl didn't understand Americans, didn't understand this capacity to follow rules even when emotions screamed otherwise, to treat prisoners well even when family had died, to care about enemy children while mourning their own dead. But he was beginning to see it wasn't weakness. The Nazis had been wrong about that. It was something else, something harder, something that required more strength than cruelty ever did. That night, Carl wrote his letter. Just a few lines. The Red Cross had limits. My dear Peter and Elise, I am alive. I am in America, in a place called Texas. I am a prisoner, but I am being treated well. I have food and shelter. I think of you every day. Be good for your grandmother. I will come home when I can. your papa. He gave the letter to Morrison the next day. Morrison took it without comment and walked away. 3 weeks later, Carl was sitting in the barracks after dinner when Morrison appeared in the doorway. Friedrich, got something for you. Carl followed him outside. Morrison handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. What is this care package? From my mother in Iowa. She heard I was working with German prisoners. She sent extra, said even enemy soldiers got mothers and kids. Carl opened the package. Inside were cookies, canned soup, chocolate bars, a small bag of hard candy. I cannot take, Carl said, trying to hand it back. It's not for you, it's for your kids. Give me their address. I'll send it through the Red Cross. From me, not you. That way it gets through faster. Carl stared at the package, at Morrison, at this impossible gesture. Why, he whispered. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Because Peter and Elise didn't start this war. Neither did Danny. We did. Us and our fathers and our leaders. But the kids, they're just kids. And kids shouldn't pay for what we did. Carl felt his eyes burn. He blinked hard. Thank you. I don't have words. Don't need words. Just give me the address. Carl wrote it down with shaking hands. Morrison took the paper, nodded once, and walked away. Hans found Carl 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot holding the empty package wrapping. Carl, you okay? Carl looked at his friend. At this young officer who'd somehow kept his idealism through the whole nightmare of war. Hans, I think I've been wrong about everything. What do you mean, the Americans, democracy, freedom? All of it. Everything we were taught was lies. I know. You know, Hans smiled sadly, I've known since Normandy. But knowing and saying are different things. Saying it makes it real, makes it mean we fought for nothing. We did fight for nothing. No, we fought for what we thought was right. That counts for something. What matters now is what we do next. Carl thought about Patterson's offer, about the education program, about learning English and American history and how democracy actually worked. The colonel wants me to take classes, learn about their system. Will you how I think so, for Peter and Elise, so I can teach them something better than what I was taught. Hans clapped him on the shoulder. Good, I'll sign up too. Maybe we can help rebuild Germany into something worth living in. That night, Carl lay in his bunk and thought about the strange trajectory of his life. From Wehrmacht tank commander to American prisoner. From Nazi believer to questioning everything. From enemy to something else. Something undefined. Something that might eventually become a bridge between two worlds. Outside, the Texas night was full of unfamiliar sounds. Crickets singing in rhythms Carl had never heard. The distant yip of coyotes. The low rumble of generators keeping the lights burning. Tomorrow would be June 28th. In less than a week, the Americans would celebrate their Independence Day. And Carl had heard rumors that prisoners would be invited. Fed the same food as the American soldiers. Included in the celebration of freedom. Carl didn't know if he'd go. Didn't know if he could sit at a table with his captors and pretend this was normal. But he was starting to understand that normal had changed, that the world he'd known was gone, that something new was being built, one strange gesture at a time, one shared meal, one care package, one moment of seeing the enemy as human. The future was uncertain. Germany was broken. His wife was dead. His children were hungry in the ruins of Hamburg. But here in this prison camp in the Texas heat, Carl had found something he hadn't expected. Not freedom, not yet, but the possibility of it. And sometimes possibility was enough to keep a man alive. The notice appeared on the morning of June 30th. Carl saw it when he returned from kitchen duty pinned to the bulletin board outside the barracks. A simple piece of paper with text in both English and German. Independence Day celebration, July 4th. All prisoners invited. American food and entertainment, attendance voluntary. Around the notice, a crowd of German prisoners argued in low voices. It's a propaganda show. They'll parade us for cameras. Maybe they just want to share their holiday. Share with enemies, impossible. Nothing about this place is what we expected. Carl read the notice 3 times. Voluntary attendance. That word stood out. They were being given a choice. The choice to celebrate with their captors or to refuse. Otto Richter pushed through the crowd and tore the notice down. He crumpled it in his fist. Anyone who attends is a traitor to Germany. The war is over, Otto, Hans said quietly. The war will never be over. Not until every German remembers who we are and what we fought for. We fought for a lie, Karl heard himself say. The crowd went silent. Otto turned slowly to face Karl. What did you say? Karl felt every eye on him, felt the weight of 12 years of Nazi indoctrination pressing down, felt the ghost of every oath he'd taken, every order he'd followed, every propaganda film he'd believed. But he also felt the letter in his boot, felt the weight of Morrison's care package now on its way to his children, felt the memory of real food and fair treatment and a system that followed rules even for enemies. We were told Americans were weak, corrupt, evil. But look around, Otto. Look at where we are. Look at how they've treated us. Everything we were taught was a lie. Otto's face went red. You've been broken. 1 month of soft beds, and you forget everything. Forget the fatherland. Forget honor. I forget nothing. I remember my wife dying in Hamburg. I remember my children starving. I remember us losing a war we started based on lies. Otto stepped closer, fists clenched. Careful, Hauptmann. You may be an officer, but that doesn't give you the right to spread defeatism. The war is defeated, Otto. We are defeated. The question is what we do next. Two American guards appeared at the edge of the crowd. They didn't intervene, just watched, ready if things escalated. Otto saw them and stepped back, but his eyes stayed on Karl. You'll regret this, all of you who've forgotten what it means to be German. He walked away. 10 other prisoners followed him. Hardliners, true believers, men who would rather die than admit they'd been wrong. The rest of the prisoners dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. Hans stayed behind with Karl. That took courage, Hans said, or stupidity. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes. Over the next 3 days, the camp transformed. American soldiers erected a wooden stage at one end of the recreation field. They brought in benches and tables. They hung flags from every pole, red and white stripes, blue fields of stars. So many flags that the whole camp seemed to flutter in the hot Texas wind. The prisoners watched from their compound, some with curiosity, some with resentment, some with that strange mixture of both that had become the dominant emotion of captivity. Karl watched the preparations and thought about his last 4th of July, 1944. He'd been in Normandy defending against the Allied invasion. American planes had filled the sky. American artillery had shredded his battalion. By the end of that day, half his men were dead. 1 year later, he would eat breakfast with the men who'd killed them. The absurdity of it should have made him angry. Instead, it just made him tired. On the morning of July 4th, Karl woke before the bugle. He lay in the pre-dawn darkness and listened to the camp coming alive. Generators humming, cooks firing up grills, the distant sound of someone testing microphones on the stage. Hans climbed down from his bunk. You're going? Yes. Me too. They dressed in silence. Around them, other prisoners were making the same decision, some putting on their cleanest shirts, some washing their faces extra carefully, preparing to attend a celebration of the nation that had defeated them. Otto stayed in his bunk face to the wall. At 0900 hours, the gates to the prisoner compound opened. An American MP stood there with a clipboard. Any prisoner who wants to attend the celebration, form a line here. 150 Germans lined up. 50 stayed behind. Karl found himself in the middle of the line, Hans beside him. Around them, men he'd eaten with, worked with, survived with. Former enemies united by defeat and uncertainty, and the strange hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong about everything. The MP counted them twice, marked his clipboard, then led them out of the compound. The walk to the recreation field took 5 minutes. 5 minutes during which Karl saw parts of Camp Swift he'd never entered. The American barracks, nicer than the prisoner compound, but not dramatically so. The motor pool with its trucks and jeeps. The hospital with its white walls and Red Cross. And everywhere Americans preparing for their holiday. Laughing, joking, casual and relaxed in a way German soldiers never were. Even in victory, the Wehrmacht had been rigid, disciplined, always aware of rank and protocol. These Americans treated their officers with respect but not fear, called them sir but argued with them, followed orders but questioned them. It was alien, confusing, and somehow it had won the war. The celebration continued through the afternoon. There were contests, a watermelon eating competition that made everyone laugh, a tug of war between different American units, a baseball game that the German prisoners watched with complete bewilderment. What kind of military game had so many rules? Where was the strategy? The discipline? But the Americans loved it, cheered and shouted and argued about plays, all very informal, all very democratic. As the sun moved toward the horizon, Colonel Patterson took the stage. The crowd quieted. Patterson spoke in English, but slowly, clearly. A translator stood beside him, rendering the words into German for the prisoners. Today we celebrate freedom, Patterson said. Want freedom from something, but freedom for something. Freedom to speak, freedom to worship, freedom to gather, freedom to pursue a better life. He paused, letting the translator catch up. Many of you German soldiers fought bravely for your country. We respect that. Courage deserves respect, even in an enemy. Carl felt something tighten in his chest. But you were lied to, Patterson continued. You were told that America was weak, that democracy was failing, that we were your enemy. Patterson gestured at the field, at the tables, at the remains of the feast. Look around, this is America. Imperfect, yes. We have our problems, our shames, our failures, but we are free. And today we share that freedom even with those who tried to destroy it. The colonel's eyes swept across the German prisoners. Some of you will go home angry, still believing the lies. That's your choice. But some of you will go home changed. You'll tell your children about this day, about being treated fairly by the nation you were taught to hate. And maybe, just maybe, you'll help build a new Germany, a democratic Germany, a free Germany. Patterson stepped back from the microphone. Happy Independence Day to Americans and Germans alike. May we all find freedom in our own ways. The Americans applauded. The Germans sat silent, processing. Carl looked at Hans. He's right, Hans whispered, about all of it. I know. What do we do with that? We remember, and when we go home, we tell the truth. That evening, as the sun set over Texas and the temperature finally dropped below 100 degrees, Carl sat on the steps of his barracks and watched the sky turn orange and purple. His stomach was still full. His fingers still smelled faintly of bacon grease. His mind was still turning over everything he'd seen and heard. Hans sat beside him. Otto didn't eat all day, Hans said. Just sat in there refusing. His choice, is it though, or is it just fear? Fear of admitting he was wrong. Carl thought about that. Maybe both. Choice and fear aren't opposites. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear, different stars than Carl had known in Europe. The Texas sky vast and clear and full of unfamiliar constellations. Tomorrow Carl would write another letter to his children. He'd tell them about the 4th of July, about bacon and flags and a colonel who spoke about freedom like it was something real and precious and worth fighting for. He'd tell them that their father had been wrong, about America, about democracy, about what strength really meant. And he'd tell them that someday when Germany was rebuilt, they should remember that there was another way, a way that didn't require lies or hatred or endless war, a way that could afford to give bacon to prisoners on a holiday. Because that Carl was beginning to understand was what real strength looked like. Not the ability to crush enemies, but the ability to treat them with dignity, even in victory. Not the power to break rules, but the discipline to follow them even when emotions demanded otherwise. Not the freedom from responsibility, but the freedom to choose to speak to build something better. August 1945. The heat showed no sign of breaking. Carl stood outside a converted supply building that now served as a classroom. A sign in English and German read, Re-Education Program, Voluntary. Inside, 15 Germans sat on wooden benches. Hans was there. Otto was not. Behind a simple desk stood a woman in her late 40s. She had gray hair pulled back, sharp eyes, and the bearing of someone who'd taught for decades. I am Professor Margaret Hayes, she said in perfect German, then switched to English. But we will speak English here. You must learn. The classroom was sparse. Wooden walls, a blackboard, a ceiling fan that turned slowly, pushing warm air in circles, windows screened against insects. It smelled of chalk dust and old paper. Margaret wrote on the board in large letters, all men are created equal. She stepped back and looked at the class. This is from the American Declaration of Independence, 1776. Can anyone read it in English? Carl tried. His English was better now after 2 months of practice. All men are made equal, created equal, close enough. What does this mean? The Germans looked at each other. One finally answered in German. It means everyone has the same rights. Margaret nodded. Then she picked up the chalk again and wrote underneath the first sentence, slavery, segregation, Indian genocide. The room went silent. You see, Margaret said, America was founded on a beautiful idea. All men created equal. But we failed that idea. For 100 years we kept slaves. For another 100 we segregated by race. We destroyed the native peoples who lived here first. Even now in 1945 we do not live up to our own principles. Carl raised his hand. Margaret nodded. Professor, in Germany we could not say such things about our country. We would be arrested. I know. That's the difference between democracy and dictatorship. In a democracy, we must admit our faults or nothing changes. We criticize our government not because we hate our country, but because we love it enough to want it to be better. She let that sink in. The Nazis told you that free speech was weakness, that criticism of the state was treason. But look where that got Germany. You couldn't question Hitler. You couldn't debate policy. You couldn't say this is wrong even when you knew it was. And so you followed a madman into destruction. The next lesson was about the separation of powers. Margaret drew 3 boxes on the board: President, Congress, courts. She explained how each limited the others, how the president couldn't make laws alone, how Congress couldn't enforce them alone, how courts could strike down laws that violated the Constitution. No one has total power, she said. That's the point. Power corrupts, always. So we split it up. We make it argue with itself. It's messy, it's slow, but it prevents dictatorship. Hans asked, but doesn't that make government weak? Does it? America just defeated Germany and Japan at the same time we built the atomic bomb. We produced more tanks and planes and ships than any nation in history. Does that sound weak to you? No, Professor. Strength doesn't come from having one strong leader. It comes from having millions of citizens who are free to innovate, to create, to criticize, to improve. That's why we won. Not because Roosevelt was smarter than Hitler, but because our system was better. One afternoon in late August, Margaret brought something different to class. Photographs. She laid them face down on her desk. Carl could see her hands were shaking slightly. What I'm about to show you is difficult, she said. Some of you may want to leave, that's fine. But I think you need to see what happened, what your country did, what you fought for. She turned over the first photograph. It showed a pile of bodies, skeletal, naked, stacked like cordwood. The second photograph showed living people who looked like skeletons, hollow eyes, ribs showing, children among them. The third showed ovens, industrial ovens, for burning bodies. This is Dachau, Margaret said quietly, one of many camps. We liberated it in April. There were others, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, the list goes on. Carl stared at the photographs. His vision tunneled. His ears rang. He stood up abruptly, walked to the door, made it outside before he vomited. Hans followed him, stood nearby not speaking. Carl wiped his mouth with shaking hands. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to God, Hans, I didn't know. I know. We heard rumors, but I thought they were Allied propaganda. I thought. Margaret appeared in the doorway. She looked at Carl with something that wasn't quite sympathy, something harder. Captain Friedrich, come back inside. I can't look at that. You must. You fought for this. You must see what you fought for. I fought for Germany. No, you fought for a monster who wore Germany's flag. There's a difference, POWs. Carl slid down the wall, head in his hands. My wife died for this. My children are starving for this. And it was all for that. Margaret sat down beside him on the dusty ground. Yes, it was. And now you have a choice. You can deny it. Pretend you didn't know. Pretend it wasn't that bad. Many Germans will make that choice. Or you can face it. Accept the truth. And when you go home, You can tell your children what really happened. You can teach them to never let it happen again. Who will believe me? Your children will. That's enough. One generation tells the next. Truth spreads slowly, but it spreads. Carl looked up at her. Why do you care? Why do you want to help us? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Because I'm German too. I left in 1938. I saw what was coming, but my sister stayed. She thought I was being dramatic. She had two children, little girls. They were sent to Auschwitz in 1943 because their father was Jewish. Carl felt cold despite the heat. I'm sorry. So am I every day. But I can't change the past. I can only try to change the future. And the future is people like you, going home, teaching the next generation, building something better. That night, Carl wrote in his journal, in English now. His handwriting was shaky but readable. I came to Texas as a Nazi. I will leave as a German. There is a difference. The first believed lies. The second must learn truth. I saw photographs today. I cannot unsee them. I do not want to unsee them. Peter and Elise must know. The whole world must know. This must never happen again. The next day, Morrison found Carl in the kitchen. Got news. Package arrived for your kids. Red Cross confirmed delivery 2 weeks ago. Carl stopped washing the pot in his hands. They received it. Yeah. Your mother-in-law sent a reply through Red Cross channels. Says the children are doing better. The canned milk helped. The medicine helped. She says to thank whoever sent it. Carl had to grip the edge of the sink. I don't know how to thank you. Morrison shifted his weight. Don't. I didn't do it for thanks. Then why? I told you because kids are just kids. Because Danny would have wanted me to. Because... Morrison paused. Because maybe if we treated each other like humans from the start, none of this would have happened. Maybe. I'm sending another package next week. Bigger. Got some stuff from the other guys in my unit. They heard about your kids. They wanted to help. Carl looked at Morrison, this hard-faced sergeant who'd lost a brother to German tanks, who had every reason for hatred, who chose something else instead. You are a good man, Sergeant. I'm just a man, trying to do the right thing, same as you. Morrison left. Carl stood at the sink, hands in cold dishwater, crying quietly where no one could see. September brought slightly cooler weather. The education classes continued 3 times a week. Margaret taught them about the Constitution, about the Bill of Rights, about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. In Germany, you had one party, she said, one leader, one way to think. Here we have Democrats and Republicans arguing constantly, socialists and conservatives, newspapers criticizing the president every day. It's loud, it's messy, but it's free. She taught them about federalism, how states had their own governments, how local communities made their own decisions, how power flowed from the bottom up, not top down. Hitler controlled everything from Berlin, she said. What you ate, what you read, what you said, where you worked. Here the federal government handles national defense and interstate commerce. Everything else people decide for themselves. Carl absorbed it all, took notes, asked questions. His English improved daily. One evening, Hans and Carl sat outside the barracks watching the sun set. Do you think it could work? Hans asked. Democracy in Germany. I don't know. We have no experience with it. Weimar failed. The Kaiser before that was a monarchy. But we have to try, don't we? What's the alternative? Another dictator. Carl thought about the photographs Margaret had shown, about his wife's death, about his children starving, about all of it. We try, we teach, we build something better, for Peter and Elise, for all the children. You sound like Margaret now. Maybe that's good. In late September, Carl received devastating news. A letter from Germany arrived through the Red Cross. His mother-in-law wrote that Peter had pneumonia, that Elise had dysentery, that the hospitals had no medicine, that without help, she feared the worst. Carl went directly to Colonel Patterson's office. Sir, I must ask, can I send medicine, money, anything? Patterson looked at the letter, read it slowly. I'm sorry, Captain. The answer is still no. We can't allow direct transfer of goods or funds yet. The occupation authorities haven't set up the proper channels. But my children are dying. I know, I'm sorry, I truly am. Carl felt his world collapsing. Everything he'd endured, everything he'd learned, and for what? To sit helpless while his children suffered. He stumbled out of the office, sat on the ground outside, put his head between his knees. He heard footsteps, looked up. Morrison stood there. Heard you got bad news. Carl couldn't speak, just nodded. Morrison sat down beside him. The kid's sick. Yes, no medicine, no help. I am useless here. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, how much medicine we talking about? What? How much, what kind? Pneumonia medicine for infection and medicine for dysentery. Because I got a buddy in the medical unit. Owes me a favor, big favor, and I know a Red Cross nurse who's shipping stuff to Hamburg next week. Carl stared at him. You cannot do this. It is against rules. Probably, but I ain't not gonna sit here and let kids die when I can help. Are you Tim Morrison? If you are caught, then I get court-martialed. Big deal. War's over anyway. I'll live. Why would you risk this? Morrison looked out at the Texas sunset. I checked something else. Not just where your tank was, where you were before. Your unit defended a town called Bastonia for 3 days, held off 2 SS divisions, saved a lot of American lives. You didn't have to do that, could have retreated, but you held because there were civilians in that town who needed protecting. Carl remembered Bastonia, remembered the choice, let the SS through to massacre the civilians or make a stand. How do you know this? After action reports, war diary. I read a lot after Danny died, trying to understand, and I found that story about a panzer captain who stopped an SS massacre. I was following orders. Bullshit. I read what orders you had. They said retreat. You disobeyed. You made a choice. You chose to protect civilians even though they were enemy civilians. Morrison stood up. So yeah, I'm gonna help your kids because you helped ours when it mattered, because that's what humans do for each other. 3 days later, Morrison slipped Carl a note. Package sent, 2 vials penicillin, dysentery medicine, vitamins. Should arrive in 10 to 14 days. Don't tell anyone, especially not Patterson. Carl grabbed Morrison's hand, shook it hard. I owe you my children's lives. You don't owe me anything, just promise me something. Anything. When you get home, when you teach your kids, teach them about this, about what happened when 2 enemies chose to see each other as humans. Teach them that it's possible, that it's worth it. I promise. October brought the first real cold. The metal stove in the barracks was fired up at night. Carl lay in his bunk and thought about home, about winter in Hamburg, about Peter and Elise sleeping under thin blankets in a half-destroyed apartment. But now, thanks to Morrison, they had medicine. They had a chance. A letter arrived in early November. Dear Carl, the children are better. The medicine arrived. Peter's fever broke. Elise is eating again. I don't know how you arranged this, but thank you. Thank your American friend. You are saving their lives, your mother-in-law. Carl showed the letter to Morrison that night. Morrison just nodded. Good. That's all? Just good. What else is there to say? Kids are alive. Mission accomplished. You are a strange man, Morrison. Yeah, well, you're not so normal yourself, Friedrich. They sat in companionable silence. When do you think we go home? Carl asked. Heard rumors, maybe spring. They're working on repatriation schedules now. Spring. You scared, terrified. Germany is destroyed, no jobs, no houses, no food, and everyone will hate me for losing the war. Maybe, or maybe they'll be too tired to hate, too busy rebuilding. What will you do after the war? Morrison thought about it. Go home to Iowa, use the GI Bill, maybe go to college, become a teacher. Teacher like Margaret. Maybe teach history, teach kids about the war, make sure they understand why we fought, what we fought for. You would be good teacher. What about you? I don't know, translator maybe. My English is good now, or teacher too. Teach about democracy, about what I learned here. That'd be something, a former Nazi teaching democracy. Former Nazi, yes, I like that, former. Winter came to Texas, mild by German standards but cold enough for frost in the mornings. Margaret's classes continued. The subjects grew deeper. She taught them about the judicial system, about trials by jury, about the presumption of innocence, about the right to a lawyer. In Germany, the state could arrest you and hold you indefinitely, she said. No trial, no lawyer, no due process. Here, even the worst criminal gets a trial, gets a lawyer, gets to face his accusers. Because rights aren't just for good people. They're for everyone. Or they're not really rights. She taught them about free markets, about private property, about the ability to own a business without state permission. The Nazis controlled the economy completely, she said. They decided what to produce, who to hire, what to pay. Here people decide for themselves. Start businesses. Compete. Innovate. That's why America produces so much. Because millions of people are free to create. In December, Margaret brought a special guest, a rabbi from Houston. Rabbi Goldstein was 70 years old. He'd emigrated from Germany in 1935. I want you to hear from someone who lived through what you're going through, Margaret said. The rabbi spoke in accented German. I was born in Munich. I loved Germany. I served in the First World War. I won the Iron Cross. I thought I was German, first Jewish, second. I was wrong. He told his story. The boycotts, the laws, the Kristallnacht, the decision to leave everything and flee. My brother stayed. He thought it would pass, that it couldn't get worse. He was wrong. He died in Treblinka, with his wife, his 3 children. The classroom was silent. I don't tell you this to make you feel guilty. Most of you were children when it started. You didn't make these choices, but you will make the choices that come next, and that's what matters. He looked at each of them. Some of you will go home and pretend it didn't happen, pretend you didn't know. That's easy. That's comfortable. Others will face it, accept the truth, teach your children, build something better. Build something. That's hard. That's painful. But that's the only way forward. He paused. I don't hate you. I hate what was done. I hate the system that did it. But you sitting here learning, trying to change, you give me hope. Hope that maybe someday Germany can be a nation I could visit again. Maybe even love again. After he left, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Carl raised his hand. Professor, the rabbi said he won the Iron Cross in the First War. Then they killed him anyway. How do we stop that from happening again? Margaret nodded. By never letting one group have all the power, by protecting minority rights in the Constitution, by teaching that all people have value, by remembering, by never forgetting. Is that enough? I don't know, Captain, but it's all we have. February 1946. The announcement came on a cold morning. Colonel Patterson stood before the assembled prisoners in the mess hall. Gentlemen, repatriation begins next month. You'll be going home in groups of 500. First group leaves March 15th. Your names will be posted by barracks number. The mess hall erupted. Shouts in German, some happy, some fearful, all loud. Patterson waited for quiet. You've been here 9 months. Some of you arrived as enemies. I hope you leave as something else. Maybe not friends, but at least people who understand each other. People who know that the American way isn't perfect, but it's worth defending. And maybe, just maybe, worth bringing to Germany. Carl found his name on the list that afternoon. Group 3, departure date April 2nd. Hans was on the same list. Otto was on Group 1, leaving earlier. That evening, Carl attended Margaret's final class. She'd prepared certificates, handwritten on nice paper. Completion of Democratic Education Program. Camp Swift, Texas, February 1946. She handed each student a small book as well. The Constitution of the United States, in German. When she got to Carl, she held his hand for a moment. Captain Friedrich, you've been an excellent student. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Professor. You changed my life. No, you changed your own life. I just showed you some ideas. You did the hard work of accepting them. She gave him the Constitution. Take this to your children. Show them what a free society looks like. Teach them that there's another way. I will, I promise. Good, because Germany will need people like you, people who've seen both systems, people who can teach the difference. After class, Carl walked back to the barracks alone. He opened the Constitution and read the first words. We the people, not we the Führer, not we the state, we the people. Such a simple idea, such a powerful idea. He would take this home. He would show Peter and Elise. He would teach them that power comes from citizens, not from dictators. That freedom is worth fighting for. That democracy, for all its flaws, is better than the alternative. The night before departure, Morrison found Carl packing his few belongings. So, this is it. Yes, tomorrow we go to port, then ship home. Morrison handed him a package. One more care package. For the road. Got some food in there, chocolate for the kids, and this. He pulled out a photo. It showed Morrison and Carl standing outside the kitchen, shaking hands, smiling slightly. When did you take this? Last month. Asked one of the guys to shoot it. Thought you might want it. Something to remember. Carl looked at the photo. At this moment, captured forever. Enemy and captor, soldier and prisoner, and somehow, despite everything, something like friends. I will keep this always. Show my children. Tell them about you, about the American who sent them medicine when he didn't have to. And I'll tell my students about you someday, about the German who chose truth over pride. They stood there awkwardly. Then Carl held out his hand. Morrison took it. They shook. Then unexpectedly, Morrison pulled him into a quick hug. Take care of those kids, Friedrich. I will, and Morrison. Thank you for everything. Just be a good teacher. That's all the thanks I need. The next morning, 200 prisoners boarded buses. They drove to the port in Houston, the same port where they had arrived 9 months ago. The ship was different, newer, clean, no cargo hold this time, actual passenger cabins. The journey back took 10 days. Carl spent most of it on deck watching the ocean, thinking about what waited at home. Hans stood beside him one afternoon. Scared, Hans asked. Terrified. Me too, but we have something the others don't. What? We know what we're building toward. We've seen it work. We know democracy is possible. If people want it, then we make them want it. We teach, we explain, we show them there's another way. Carl pulled out the Constitution booklet. With this, with that. The ship entered Hamburg Harbor on March 23, 1946. Carl stood at the rail and stared at his city, or what was left of it. 50% destroyed, rubble everywhere, blackened buildings, skeletal churches, people in rags moving through the ruins like ghosts. This was home. This was what he'd come back to. The prisoners disembarked slowly. British occupation soldiers checked names against lists, gave each man a temporary identity card, pointed them toward processing tents. Carl walked through the ruins in a daze. Everything familiar was gone. Streets he'd known since childhood were unrecognizable. Landmarks destroyed. Neighborhoods erased. He found his mother-in-law's address. The building was partially standing. The left side had been bombed. The right side remained shored up with wooden beams. He climbed the stairs. His legs shook. He knocked on the door. It opened. His mother-in-law stood there, older, thinner, worn. Behind her 2 children, Peter, 10 years old now, taller, skinny, serious eyes. Elise, 8, small for her age, cautious. They stared at Carl. Peter spoke first. Papa, Carl fell to his knees, held out his arms. The children ran to him. He pulled them close, felt their thin bodies, felt their hearts beating, felt them alive and real and here. He wept, couldn't help it, just held them and wept. You came back, Elise whispered. I promised. That night, by candlelight, because there was no electricity, Carl sat with his children. They peppered him with questions. What was America like? Were they mean to you? Did you have enough food? Carl answered carefully. Told them about the camp, about the barracks, about learning English. Then Peter asked the hard question. Papa, did we lose the war because we were bad? Carl looked at his son, at this child who'd grown up in a nightmare, who'd lost his mother, who'd nearly died himself. We lost because we followed bad leaders, because we believed lies, because we forgot how to tell right from wrong. Are we bad Germans? No, Peter. Germans are not bad, but Germany did bad things, very bad things, and now we have to make it right. How? Carl pulled out the Constitution booklet. By building something better. By learning from people who got it right. By teaching you and Elise and all the children that there's another way. He opened the book. This is what the Americans believe in. We the people. Not we the Führer. Not we the state. The people. Elise traced the words with her finger. What does it mean? It means people have power, not dictators. It means you can speak freely, think freely, choose freely. It means you're worth something just because you're human, not because of your race or religion or who your parents are, just because you are human. Peter looked skeptical. Does it really work? I saw it work. The Americans treated us well, even though we were enemies. They followed rules even when they didn't have to. They shared food even when they could have starved us, because their system makes them strong enough to be kind. Can we do that here? I don't know, but we have to try. The next morning, Carl went looking for work. The occupation authorities were hiring translators, people who spoke English and German. The pay was minimal, but it was something. Carl got the job, started immediately. His work brought him into contact with American and British occupation officials. He helped translate documents, facilitated meetings, explained German bureaucracy to confused Allied officers, and slowly, carefully, he began to talk about what he'd learned in Texas, about democracy, about fair trials, about free speech, about constitutions that limited government power. Some people listened, some didn't, but Carl kept talking. In 1947, he started teaching English at a local school, part-time at first, then full-time. In 1948, he began teaching civics as well, using the Constitution booklet Margaret had given him. He told his students about America, about Camp Swift, about Morrison and Patterson and Margaret, about learning that enemies could choose to be something else. Not everyone wanted to hear it. Some parents complained. This former Nazi teaching about American democracy, how dare he? But Carl persisted. By 1950, West Germany was forming a new government, a democratic government. The basic law was being drafted. Carl attended meetings, wrote letters, argued for constitutional protections, for separation of powers, for free speech. He quoted the American Constitution, explained how it worked, showed how democracy could be strong and stable. Some of his ideas made it into the basic law. Not all, but some. In 1952, he became a full professor at Hamburg Gymnasium, teaching history and civics. Every year on July 4th, he told his students the story of the bacon, of the 4th of July celebration, of the day he learned that everything he'd been taught was a lie. Peter went to university, studied medicine, became a doctor. Elise became a teacher, like her father. Both of them taught their own children about democracy, about freedom, about the Constitution their grandfather had carried back from Texas. The years passed. Carl never saw Morrison again. But they exchanged letters twice a year, Christmas and July 4th. Morrison became a teacher, as he'd said, taught history in Des Moines, married a nurse named Sarah who'd worked at Camp Swift, had 2 children, named the boy Daniel. In his letters, Morrison told Carl about teaching American students about the war, about explaining why they'd fought, what they'd fought for. Carl told Morrison about teaching German students the same thing. 2 former enemies, 2 teachers, both trying to make sure the next generation understood. In 1965, Carl received a letter, an invitation. 20th anniversary reunion, Camp Swift veterans and former POWs, July 4th, 1965. All welcome. Carl was 52 years old now, gray-haired, but still teaching. He showed the invitation to Peter and Elise. Both were married now. Peter had children of his own. Should I go? Carl asked. Yes, Peter said immediately. You should go. We should all go. So in July 1965, Carl Friedrich boarded a plane to Texas. His first flight, his first time back to America in 19 years. Peter came with him, wanted to see the place his father talked about constantly. They landed in Austin, drove to Camp Swift. The camp was smaller now. Much of it had been decommissioned, but parts remained. The barracks, the mess hall, the recreation field where the celebration had been held. 100 former American soldiers were there, 50 former German POWs. Carl walked across the field slowly. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, But the memories were still huge. He saw Morrison standing near the old kitchen building. Morrison was 48 now, graying, heavier, weathered by 2 decades. Their eyes met across the field. Both men smiled. They walked toward each other, met in the middle, embraced immediately. "You came," Morrison said. "Of course, how could I not?" "How are the kids?" "Peter is here, with me. Doctor now. Elise is teacher in Hamburg. Both married, both with children. I got two, boy and girl, Danny and Margaret." Good names, seemed right. They walked to the old kitchen where they'd first really talked. The building was locked now, unused, but they could see through the windows. "Remember?" Morrison asked. "Every detail. You asked me why I followed Hitler. I had no good answer. And now I know, I followed him because I wanted to believe, because the truth was too hard, because lies are easier than reality." They sat on the steps outside. Peter joined them. Morrison shook his hand. "Your father saved a lot of lives," Morrison said. "He told me you saved his, and mine and Elise's. We saved each other." Colonel Patterson gave a speech that afternoon. He was 72 now, retired, but still sharp. "20 years ago, we were enemies. Today, we're allies. How did that happen?" He pointed at Carl and Morrison sitting together. "Because of men like these, who saw past the uniform, who chose understanding over hatred, who proved that the best way to win a war is to win the peace." Afterward, Carl stood on the recreation field where the bacon had been served. The grills were gone, the tables were gone, the flags were gone, but he could still smell it, could still taste it, could still feel the moment when everything changed. Peter stood beside him. "This is where it happened." "Yes, right here. I stood in line. They gave me bacon. 4 strips. I cried when I tasted it. Because it was good. Because it was kind. Because I expected cruelty and got kindness. Because it broke something in me. Some wall of lies. And that changed everything. That started everything. The real change took time. Learning, talking to Morrison, learning from Margaret, seeing the camp photos. But it started here. With bacon." They flew home 3 days later. Carl was quiet on the flight, processing, remembering. Peter finally asked, "Was it worth it, going back?" "Yes, I needed to close the circle, to see Morrison one more time, to stand where it happened, to remember. Remember that change is possible, that enemies can become friends, that the future isn't determined by the past." Carl lived another 23 years. He taught until he was 70. Retired in 1983. Died in 1988 at age 75. At his funeral, Peter read from his father's journal. "I came to Texas as a Nazi. I left as a German. There is a difference. The first believed lies. The second learned truth. I will spend the rest of my life teaching that difference." Morrison died in 1995 at age 78. Heart attack. Quick and painless. At his funeral, his son Danny read from letters his father had kept. Letters from Carl. 43 years of correspondence. About teaching, about democracy, about hope. The Constitution booklet that Margaret gave Carl ended up in a museum in Hamburg. It sits in a glass case. Worn, annotated. Pages dog-eared from decades of use. The label reads, "Carried by Hauptmann Karl Friedrich from Camp Swift, Texas to Hamburg, Germany, 1946. Used to teach democratic principles to post-war German students. Gift of the Friedrich family." Beside it hangs a photograph. 2 men shaking hands outside a kitchen in Texas. One American, one German. Former enemies. Teachers both. The plaque underneath quotes Carl's journal. "Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's a piece of bacon, a fair rule, a kind gesture, and the willingness to see your enemy as human. That's not weakness, that's strength. That's America."